Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for Rainbow Magic. Rainbow Magic is a hop that is hosted by Crazy Craft Obsession, and each month we're going to make a monochromatic layout in a different color of the rainbow. And as you can see, for this month we're using the color orange. At the beginning of the video, I was showing you some of the Martha Stewart and Tim Holtz pattern papers that I'm going to be using on this layout. But since I'm working on the mixed media, I will tell you what's going on there. I'm using some sprays. I used a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist, and it was called Sharp Orange. And then I also use a Prima Color Bloom 2 spray. That one is called Pot Marigold. These are two different colors of orange. And my thought was to put my photo in the upper right-hand side of the page and then have the color kind of streaming down to the left. And I kind of just thought of that as I was creating. I didn't really have a set plan other than I knew what photo I was going to use and I knew that I was going to create an orange background. I'm using, I guess, my most used technique, which is the packaging technique. I put small amounts of spray on a piece of plastic that I have kind of laying around, and then I press those into the cardstock. I'm using a 12 by 12 inch piece of thick white cardstock. This is a 120-pound cardstock, and I have already coated it with some white gesso. I always like to have a stash of mixed media paper ready to go. So I have the 12 by 12 inch papers that I cover with gesso, and then once the gesso is dry, I'll run them through my laminator and that flattens them out, and then the papers are ready to be used. I had some overspray or excess spray in the upper left-hand corner, so because the background is gessoed, it was very easy to spray a little bit of water and then use a paper towel to get rid of some of those drops of color that I didn't want there. There are definitely pros and cons to gessoing the background. One of the pros is that it makes it very easy to fix mistakes. I sprinkled some water on top of that large area of color, and then I rolled my paper towel on top, and that lifts up a little bit of the color and just gives a cool effect to the background. I'm also using a lot of splatters on this layout because I'm only using orange. I wanted to have a lot of different shades of orange, so I like the idea of having some splatters and then having the two different color sprays, and then also having some areas where the color is lifted up. It just makes the whole area of orange a little bit more interesting. So I continued layering the color on top of that area. Now I'm going to stop adding the color for a little while, and I'm going to add some stamping. I'm using some StazOn ink in jet black. I like to use the StazOn, that way I know that if I want to add some more sprays later, everything that I've done will stay put. I have a number of different background stamps I'm going to add today. I started off with a mesh stamp, and I'm not really sure if that is the Studio Calico or the Tim Holtz mesh stamp that I have. They're very similar, and I think that they both add a lot of texture to the background. I also used a script stamp. That was something that I picked up at a flea market, but they have lots of script stamps out there to choose from, and I like the idea of having a little bit of writing. Even though you can't necessarily see the writing, I like the way that that looks on most of my layouts, or at least layouts where I make a mixed media background. Then I repeated some of the steps. I added a little bit more spray using the packaging technique, and now I'm sprinkling a little bit more water over the background, and once again I'm going to use my paper towel and lift up some of the color. Next, I selected a stencil from my stash. I have this stencil that I'm not sure if it's American Crafts or if I got it from AliExpress, but it has some chevrons on it, and I wanted to add some texture to the background, so I used some Liquitex modeling paste. I'm using a metal palette knife, and I'm adding the modeling paste in a couple of little chunks all over the layout. When I first started with mixed media backgrounds, I was never sure where to put the stamping or where to put the modeling paste. I find that often, not always, but often I like to keep the stamping and the modeling paste either on or very close to the areas that I have applied color to. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, there definitely are, but that's just a good thing to have in mind if you are starting with mixed media backgrounds and you're not sure exactly how to approach it. In addition to that chevron pattern, I noticed there was a really, really tiny dot on that same stencil, so I decided that I was going to add some modeling paste through that part of the stencil as well. And I really like the texture that that very tiny dot gave to my background. Now I'm using some watered down white acrylic paint and I'm adding some splatters to the background. Because this is a monochromatic layout, I want to make sure that I use the neutrals and the different colors of orange to their fullest. Now I'm adding a few black splatters. This is watered down black acrylic paint. The photo that I'm using on today's layout is a Halloween themed photo. I have an album that is full of photos of a trip that we took to Salem, Massachusetts several years ago, and the album is almost complete. I just have a couple of photos that need to be scrapbooked, and this was one of them. And I really like this photo, so I don't know what took me so long to scrapbook it. You'll see it in a few moments, but I thought that orange was the perfect color to use with a Halloween themed layout. Now I'm using this Stampin' Up circle and I'm adding some of the circles all around, once again, just the area of color. In the end, you don't really see the circles so much, but I think that all of these different stamps and textures, they all add a lot to the layout in the end. At least I think they do. I felt that the color in the background was in a shape that was too long and thin. I wanted to broaden it a little bit. So I thought instead of adding more sprays, I would use a stencil and extend it that way. So I'm using an Echo Park stencil. It's called Spider Cobwebs. I also use some Distress Oxide. I use carved pumpkin, ripe persimmon, and spiced marmalade. Those are all of the orange colors that I have. And I'm using the stencil just to make somewhat of a border all around this large area of color. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first. In the end, I really liked it, but at first I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it. Again, we have the gessoed background, so I would be able to play around a little bit and lift it up if I really didn't like it, but I did end up liking it. When I applied the Distress Oxide to the background, I pressed a little bit harder or repeated the application of color a few times in the areas that were closest to the central area where the color is. As we move away from that center area of the layout, I used the dauber with a lighter touch. I also used a damp paper towel and I patted that along the edge of the color, and that helped to lighten up the edge a little bit, and then it also helped to make those lines just a little bit less crisp. I liked the way that looked, but I didn't want to overdo it. I didn't want to lose all of the definition of all of those spider webs, so I stopped and left it as it is. I am going to go back and do a little bit more to the background. So now I have my photo and those pattern papers that I told you about. I have the Tim Holtz Abandoned collection in an 8x8 pad. I absolutely love that collection. Several years ago, Michaels was carrying the Tim Holtz Halloween line, and they had the absolutely beautiful paper pads, and they were on clearance, and they were really, really inexpensive back then. When things were on clearance, they really went on clearance, and I picked up any of those pads that I could find. I remember after Halloween going to any Michaels that I could find and searching through whatever remained of their Halloween items, hoping to find that pad, and I did find quite a few. So I stocked up, and now, of course, they don't sell those anymore, but that was a really beautiful pad. It had a number of papers that were perfect for this layout. It had some papers that were orange and black, orange and white, and it also had a black and white paper that I thought all went along with this challenge. I cut the papers to size and I layered them behind the photo. I used my scissors and I distressed the edges, and I also used some black soot Distress Oxide, and I wanted to have kind of a tattered look to the papers that were behind the photo. And as I had said, this is a photo from Salem, Massachusetts in October. We went into the museum that they have right in the center of town called the Peabody Museum. One year they had on display a collection of movie posters. Many of them were monster movie posters or horror themed movie posters. And then in the corner they had this shadow. My husband was telling me that this is of Dracula. I think his name was Nosferatu in one of the movies. And I just thought this was super cool and captured the mood of the whole exhibit, so I took a shot of it, and I'm really glad I did because I think it turned out to be a pretty cool picture. One of the papers that I was using from that Tim Holtz pad had orange on one side, but then it had some other colors on the other side of the paper, so I was trying to be very careful to only include the orange pieces of paper. I noticed now, a tiny little hint of green on the paper that you could see right there in some spots, but I don't think it's enough to throw off the whole layout. I still think that orange is the color you see when you look at the layout. I wanted to further distress some of those papers. I feel like I always go back and distress more. I think I'm distressing a lot when I'm working with the paper, and then when I put it around the photo, I tend to go back and add even more rips and tears and rough up the edges even more. I love to add a little bit of dimension to the page, so I used some fun foam and I popped up the photo. Now I have some ATG adhesive on the foam, which won't hold it forever, but it will hold it temporarily while I make sure that that's where I want my photo to go. I'm going to add a few different embellishments. The first thing that I have here is a piece of ribbon. It is like a Halloween themed kind of ribbon, but I wanted to distress it a little bit so that it would look a little bit more like maybe a spider web. And then I have a piece for on top of the photo and below the photo as well. And for a while, I take the ribbon that's on the top of the photo off, and I end up putting it back in the end. I do really like the way that it looks. I found half of a black spider web doily in my stash. I tried using an orange one, but there wasn't enough contrast, so you really couldn't see it. So I decided to go with the black doily. I wanted to add a title in the upper left-hand corner. I'm using some orange letters for that title. I'm going to call it Shadows of the Night. And I'm using some really, really old Scenic Route letter stickers. I thought that the font was pretty good for Halloween. For the words of and the, I used some very small Jillibean Soup letters. I attached the letters onto a piece of cardstock first so that I could move them around a little bit. Since they're so small, it makes it a little easier to manipulate if you have them attached to a piece of cardstock. I started looking through my Halloween embellishments. I was trying to find embellishments that were either orange or orange and black. I picked out a rosette that says Boo. That was from AC Moore. I also picked out a number of epoxy stickers from a Die Cut with a View pack. I found a crow or a raven that I put on top of the photo. To the left of the photo, I have a haunted house. I have some cool flourishes. I cut the flourish in half so that I could get a little bit more use out of it. There's the haunted house. There's the word scary that is underneath the photo. And there were just a whole bunch of elements that I just thought were a perfect match for this orange color scheme. There were some little orange epoxy circles, so I sprinkled those across the page. And then because it's a photo of a vampire, I thought that bats would be perfect for this page. So I found that I had a sheet of Sticko bats. They are really nice. They're all different sizes and shapes. Now I'm trying to decide where to put them on the layout. Again, I'm going to keep them on that area that has the orange color. I'm just trying to decide how many and where to position them and what sizes to put where. I did not include all of the footage of me adding the bats to the layout. It took me a long time and I kept switching things around, but you could see here where things ended up. And then I actually do go back and add a couple more bats to the bottom left-hand corner. I'm using that piece of paper towel again. It's damp, and I am just fading the color away from the edge of the layout. I didn't like the way the stencil work went all the way up to the corner or to the edge of the paper. I added a moon near the title, and that moon is yellow, so in a little bit I'm going to fix that. I don't mind having some neutral elements on the page, but I want to keep all of the color as close to orange as possible. This is where I add that ribbon back in again, and I like the way that adds a lot of texture to the page. I cover my photo with a piece of plastic, and now I'm adding a few more splatters up on the top. I often like to add splatters to areas where I have wiped color away. I think that it just kind of finishes off that area. Because I wanted to clean up that corner, a lot of the color got wiped away, so I wanted to add a little bit of it back in again. I put some ATG adhesive on the back of this little bird embellishment, and I place that under the photo. And then once again, I cover up the photo and I add a few more splatters. I started with some black splatters, and then I added some more orange splatters, and then a couple more black splatters. And I just kept adding the splatters until I was happy with the way the background came out. This is where I use one of my orange Copic markers and I color in that moon so that now it's an orange moon. I add one more bat to the lower left-hand side of the layout, and now it's complete. And here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video, everyone. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I know I'm having a great time creating layouts for this awesome hop. In the description box are links to the videos of the other scrapbookers who are creating videos for this month's orange theme, and I hope that you'll check all of them out. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you all again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.